What's the most messed up thing a person you know has done? I know someone who was doing a semester abroad in China during college. She let her boyfriend at the time fly out from the US for a week plus visit, knowing she was going to dump him the second she saw him. She did it because it would have been too hard to dump him over the phone. And to add more details as I'm remembering this, the guy did not speak Chinese, and he didn't have enough money to change his flight, so he just kinda bumbled around China for a week being miserable. He went to his wife's work New Year's party and got really drunk. He suddenly decided his wife was having an affair with her boss. A loud shouting match ensued, and he suddenly pulled out a gun. He shot his wife, her boss, and himself in the head. He and her boss were doer. His wife lost her vision but survived. They had 3 small children. My aunt and uncle are rather wealthy farmers. They have spent the last several decades building up new divisions of the business for their kids to run and eventually inherit. One of the big expansions was going from simply raising beef cattle to handling the butchering and selling the meat themselves. Anyway, for the butcher shop they built a beautiful $1 million shop and sent my cousin's husband to butcher school to get all his licensing to be the operations manager, while my cousin would be bookkeeper. They never did a thing to earn it and were essentially handed a golden ticket. It's a little complicated what happened next, but after a few years my aunt/uncle started getting negative feedback about how the place is run. When they spoke to my cousin's husband they offered him more money thinking it was a motivation issue. They were already overpaid and could afford their own $1 million home. The husband made a snarky retort that he already makes that much. That raised red flags. They ended up looking at the accounts and things seemed fishy. They went to the business after hours and took the bookkeeping files. The husband found out and drove to their house to essentially scream at them in rage. In the end it turns out they had embezzled over $1 million. By cooking the books, they got kicked out of the family business with no legal repercussions and a fat buyout bonus, and generally have little to do with any of the family. My aunt and uncle have made attempts at reconciliation because they want to see their grandchildren, but have been thus far rejected. It's insane because they were handed everything and it still wasn't good enough. They were going to inherit the business and they blew it. I was friends with a girl who was obsessed with babies. You know how some girls really like horses? She was like that with babies. Not kids, just babies and toddlers. She was only friends with me because I babysat a lot. I found out later she would take used diapers out of the ladies' bathroom. There's a lot to pick from, but one of my ex-coworkers euthanized her 2 cats because she was getting a new couch and didn't want them to ruin it. She told us this at work and didn't get why she got a bunch of blank stares back. Back in the day this kid I knew was on Xanax and stole one of his neighbor's SUVs. We lived in the type of neighborhood people just left their keys in their car/truck. Yes, I knew a lot of people who did this in the South. I was walking back to my other buddy's house from his house and was pretty messed up myself. So when he drove up next to me in an SUV offering to drive me the rest of the way I didn't think much of it. His parents and sisters had multiple cars, so I just assumed it was one of theirs. After I got in I obviously asked whose car it was and found out the truth. I was like WTF man and tried not to touch anything, and I got out at my destination and that was that. About 30 minutes later me and other friend hear fire trucks and police blaring down the road. We start calling our friend and his mom. No one knows where he is at. The next day we finally get in touch with him. He hid and slept out in the woods because after he dropped me off he went off-roading in the SUV and ultimately left it on some train tracks. A train came and hit the SUV causing fire and mayhem. Can't imagine what those neighbors had to say to the insurance. A close friend of my mother's, we'll call her Maureen, was having an affair with a person who was also married. We'll call him Patrick. Patrick's wife, who we'll call Caroline, was quite mentally unstable, suffering badly from depression because Patrick was quite abusive and was always cheating on her. Despite him being a serial cheater, Maureen was sure that it was true love and was completely committed to the idea of the two of them eventually divorcing their respective spouses and moving in together. Patrick was obviously dragging his heels with this, but the relationship lasted because both Patrick and Maureen were nasty people who delighted in tormenting Caroline. Patrick would constantly gaslight her, and Maureen would hint and always hang around, but make it just deniable enough that nothing could be proven. with Caroline's history of mental illness. Nobody believed her, figuring that she was still paranoid and accusing Patrick because he had cheated before. Patrick had convinced everyone he had changed, of course, and all of this combined to make Caroline look absolutely psychotic. Patrick and Maureen continued this behavior for over a year, absolutely tormenting this poor woman. One evening, my mother gets a phone call from Maureen, who seems to be in a state of shock. She asks my mom to come over because she just got the news that Caroline has killed herself. My mom rushes over, expecting Maureen to be in a state of absolute guilt and regret, but when she gets there, Maureen is laughing about it and says Patrick is coming over soon. My mom, who was not a very nice person herself, after all, she damn well knew about this and said nothing, was finally disgusted enough that she ripped into Maureen and left. Over the next couple of days, the story comes out. Caroline had hanged herself in her garage, and her teenage daughter had found her. Even more tragically, Caroline had timed it to ensure that neither of her children would find her. Completely unexpectedly, the daughter had returned home early and gone looking for her. In the following months, Maureen broke up with her husband and filed for divorce. She and Patrick purchased an atrocious new build suburban house together, and Patrick convinced Maureen to put the whole thing in her name. They lasted a few more months, and then Patrick started ghosting her, cheated on her, and left. Maureen's husband and teenage sons had cut contact with her. At first, the son still maintained contact, but when it became clear that Patrick disliked the younger son and was turning Maureen against him, both brothers left to go live with their dad. Maureen was left with hundreds of thousands worth of debt, as the house was in her name. On the one hand, yeah, she got played by somebody who I'm pretty sure is a legitimate sociopath. On the other hand, she still played with a woman's life and celebrated her being out of the way when she killed herself as a direct result of this behavior. So I have absolutely zero sympathy for her. I think Patrick brought out her true colors, because normal people do not do that. My 6-month-old nephew, at the time, he's 11 now, and healthy and obsessed with Fortnite like any proper 11-yo, had a SIDS episode. He stopped breathing, and the only reason he's alive is because my mom obsessively checked on him while she was babysitting. She and my brother managed to bring him around, and then they went to the hospital. My mom was understandably freaked out by this, finding her first grandchild turning blue and all. So she called her sister for emotional support, and her sister told her, verbatim, "Well, you just need to get Satan out of your life." Up to that point, I told my mom for years that her family were emotionally and mentally abusive narcissists. That is what it took for her to finally believe me and cut them out. Now, after my mom's death, those same people have the nerve to act like they have no idea why mom stopped talking to them. A guy I worked with, 21 meters, was just a year or two younger than me at the time. He struggled with a lot with depression and had a super dark sense of humor, but really funny most of the time. Would crack jokes all the time about killing himself, but wore a good enough of a smile, and with us not knowing anything at the time that no one thought it was material, just a little cringy. He found his only reason to live in the girl that he was dating at the time. She was trying to leave him because her parents didn't like him. He was sitting in his car crying and begging her to not leave him, and when he realized it was over, he called her parents to add them to the call. Only the mom joined. He blamed them for his declining mental state, and his last words were something along the line of, "I hope this scars you all forever," before shooting himself in the head with them both on the phone. His family was wealthy, but ultimately not present in his life. His parents cut him a check and would vanish for weeks at a time. He was really alone, but we only found out after. His family was ashamed of his actions and didn't write an obituary. There was no funeral. It's so odd to see someone you saw every day just vanish. I work for a gardening company, and we have guys come and go on the regular. One guy we'll call Mike, because that's his name, worked for us for a while and built up a relationship with one of the customers. Wilfred, name changed to protect the innocent. Anyway, Wilfred was around 90 years old and a veteran of WWII. He was also completely blind. He had this old BMW sitting in his cluttered garage. The thing looked like it hadn't moved in a couple of decades. The car was his pride and joy in his younger days, and he would tell anyone who would listen about how he used to drive himself and his wife to the local town to go dancing. Anyway, Mike told Wilfred he would take the car home and fix it up and bring it back. When it was all sorted, it was decided if he could get the old girl purring again, Wilfred would pay Mike a pretty penny. What Mike actually did was drive it straight to a scrapyard, sell it for scrap value, then lie through his teeth every time Wilfred asked about it. No, he wasn't fired. So yeah, I think that's the most disgusting thing I have seen anyone do. Steal from a blind old man. Friend was in her final year of uni, had strong grades, and a really great internship lined up with a place she dreamed about working at that almost certainly would have led to a great job. Her parents faked her younger brother's death on the day where she had 3 finals back to back to back. They wanted to test whether she cared more about her family or her career. Supposedly, she raced home in panic and grief, getting plane tickets and flying across the country, trying to get deferred exams on short notice. One of her profs, who helmed 2 of those classes, required a death certificate, which she couldn't get. Since her brother was alive and well, she didn't get to graduate because of that. At least not in that semester, and she lost her dream internship. Thankfully, she got a good job after graduating half a year later, not nearly as good as the one she lost out on, and she's largely cut her parents out of her life. My bipolar alcoholic brother has a history of beating and choking his girlfriends. He moved in with my elderly father after my mom died and refused to leave, and my dad refused to make him leave or press charges against the domestic abuse because it was his son. My dad couldn't find peace in his own home, and I was powerless to stop it. On different occasions my brother broke my dad's finger, almost broke his leg, and threw a knife and hit him handle first in the head and knocked a gash in his head. If it had been blade first, he likely would have died. Still no charges. Luckily the arrests and other trouble piled up until he spent time in jail and rehab and got his own place, and I've moved my father closer to me now so I can protect him better and he can have a safe place to live. My brother is already talking about moving to my dad's old house for free since nobody is living there, since everybody basically had to move away to be safe from him. He's a total degenerate piece of sh. My biological mother and I haven't been in contact for over 10 years. She was on the run because of child support. When I finally turned 18, my dad and social services finally talked all together, discussing what she owed all those years. The first thing she said was, she's 18. I don't have to pay anything. My dad and stepmom didn't know I was in the room. I have no love for before this, but more so now. That was the first time I heard her voice in over 10 years. This one hurt the most, but she did a lot of despicable things. She let her BF at the time, when she had me and my sister for custody, drug and molest me, made me take cold showers if I told her what he did. I fended for me and my sister most of the time, used us to steal from every store she went into, told me my dad, who loved us more than the world itself, hated me and wish I was dead. A pile of dog poop is more productive than she ever had been or will be. She's done a lot more, but these stick out the most.